The mahogany doors of the Westfield Town Council chambers intimidated me as I stood outside, my hands trembling slightly. The building itself, a restored colonial structure with imposing white columns, seemed to symbolize the power dynamics I was about to challenge. My cotton blouse felt suddenly inadequate next to the tailored suits streaming past me. "Rebecca, you're still planning on going through with this?" Thomas's voice came from behind, his tone a mixture of condescension and disbelief. My husband of 15 years adjusted his Rolex, a gift from his father when he made partner at Westfield's most prestigious law firm. "I told you I'm just attending," I said, clutching my folder containing months of research. "Everyone has a right to be here." Thomas's laugh was short and sharp. "Of course they do. But speaking, that's different. These people have known my family for generations. The Harringtons built half this town." He gestured toward the BMW parked in his reserved space, one of the perks of being the mayor's personal attorney. "Let's be realistic. You're a part-time librarian with a liberal arts degree. What could you possibly contribute to a discussion about the town's development plan?" The dismissal stung, but I'd grown accustomed to it. When we'd first met at Northwestern, Thomas had found my idealism charming. Somewhere between his law school graduation and his father's connections securing him a position at the firm, that charm had transformed into a liability. "I've lived here for 12 years, too," I reminded him. "And that qualifies you to challenge a multi-million-dollar development project." He straightened his Italian silk tie. "Rebecca, this isn't one of your book clubs. The investors flying in from New York won't be impressed by your community garden ideas." Inside, the chamber was filled with Westfield's elite, the same faces I'd seen at country club fundraisers and charity galas, where I'd stood silently beside Thomas, the dutiful wife. Mayor Richardson nodded at my husband from the raised platform, and several council members waved familiarly. I chose a seat in the back row while Thomas moved confidently to the reserved section up front. The polished leather briefcase that had been our anniversary gift gleamed under the chandelier lights. "Ladies and gentlemen," the mayor began, his voice carrying authority through the speakers, "today we discuss the Riverside Heights proposal, which represents a $75 million investment in our community." The PowerPoint presentation displayed sleek glass buildings replacing the historic waterfront district, the heart of our town and home to small businesses that had operated for generations. I knew the owners: Maria from the bakery, old Mr. Chen's hardware store, the Watson family's bookshop where I volunteered weekends. When public comments opened, Thomas approached the microphone first. His presence commanded immediate respect. The Harrington name carried weight in these chambers. "As a lifelong resident and representative of the development team," he began smoothly, "I can assure the council that this project will bring Westfield into the modern era. The tax benefits alone will fund educational improvements and infrastructure upgrades that we desperately need." What he didn't mention were the families and businesses that would be displaced. The environmental impact studies that had been quietly sidestepped, the promises made in closed-door meetings I'd overheard when Thomas hosted colleagues in our Maple Street Colonial with its meticulously landscaped garden. I raised my hand when they called for additional comments. Thomas noticed, and the confident smile he directed my way contained something darker. He returned to his seat, leaning to whisper something to Councilman Davis that made them both chuckle. The clerk announced, "Next, we have Sarah Jenkins, followed by Rebecca Harrington." Thomas's head snapped up at my name. His eyes found mine across the room, narrowing in disbelief. He stood, walking briskly to intercept me as I moved toward the waiting area. Gripping my elbow with just enough pressure to appear cordial to observers, he hissed, "What do you think you're doing?" "Contributing to the discussion," I replied, pulling free, "just like everyone else." "Rebecca, these people respect me, my reputation. is exactly why I need to speak, I finished. His laugh was meant to wound. She'll never have a voice here, he announced loudly enough for nearby council members to hear. My wife has many talents, but urban development isn't one of them. The statement hung in the air as Sarah Jenkins concluded her comments about traffic concerns. The room's acoustics had carried Thomas's dismissal further than he'd intended. Several heads turned our way, including Mayor Richardson's. "Next speaker, Rebecca Harrington," the clerk announced through the microphone. I moved forward, feeling Thomas's glare burning into my back. As I approached the podium, I noticed something unexpected. Attentive faces. Not just polite attention, but genuine interest, especially from the women in the audience. "Good evening," I began, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "I'm Rebecca Harrington, and while many of you know me as Thomas's wife, tonight I'm speaking as the coordinator of the Westfield Historical Archives project." I saw confusion flash across Thomas's face. This was the independent research I'd been conducting for months, while he assumed I was just organizing library fundraisers. Over the past year, I've digitized and analyzed over 2,000 historical documents related to our waterfront district, I continued, opening my folder and distributing copies of my findings to the council members. What I discovered may significantly impact your decision about the Riverside Heights development. The council chambers fell silent as I placed my documents on the table. Mayor Richardson leaned forward, adjusting his glasses to examine the first page, a land deed from 1892 that I'd discovered buried in county archives. These records show that the waterfront parcels proposed for demolition were deeded to the town with specific preservation clauses, I explained, my voice growing stronger. Any development must maintain the historical character and provide public access to the riverfront. Thomas rose halfway out of his seat, his face flushing crimson. We'd shared a home for 15 years, but in this moment he was looking at a stranger. Furthermore, I continued, advancing to the second document, the environmental impact report commissioned by the developers, I glanced briefly at Thomas, omitted critical findings about the wetland ecosystem that would be destroyed. I've included the complete original draft that was submitted before certain sections were removed. Councilwoman Martinez examined the highlighted sections, her eyebrows rising. "Ms. Harrington, how did you obtain these documents?" Dr. Ellison from Westfield University's Environmental Science Department conducted the original assessment. When he realized his findings had been altered in the final submission, he provided me with his complete research. I took a breath. He's prepared to testify if necessary. The murmuring in the room grew louder. Thomas was now standing fully, his knuckles white against the polished wooden railing. "Mr. Mayor," he interjected, "my wife has no authority to present these claims without proper legal—" "Actually," I interrupted, "as a certified archivist with the Westfield Historical Society, I do have standing to present historical documentation relevant to public land use decisions." The certification course I'd completed last summer, which Thomas had dismissed as one of my hobby projects, was now proving its worth. Mayor Richardson cleared his throat. "Mrs. Harrington." "Ms. Harrington is fine," I corrected gently. His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Ms. Harrington, these allegations are serious. Are you suggesting the documents were deliberately altered for this proposal?" "I'm not making accusations about intent," I replied carefully. "I'm simply presenting the complete historical and environmental record so the council can make a fully informed decision." I then motioned to the back of the room, where Maria Gonzalez stood with several other small business owners from the district. "With your permission, I'd like to invite the current business owners to present their alternative development plan, one that preserves the historical structures while allowing for economic growth." Thomas was now moving toward the podium, but Councilwoman Martinez raised her hand. I'd like to hear this alternative proposal. Mr. Mayor, Thomas's voice carried the authoritative tone he used in courtrooms. This is highly irregular. The agenda allows for public comment on the development proposal, Mayor Richardson responded, seeming slightly annoyed at being told procedure by Thomas. And since Ms. Harrington has raised legitimate concerns about potentially incomplete information in our briefing materials, I believe we should hear this alternative. Maria approached with architectural renderings created by her son, an urban planning student at Columbia. The drawing showed a revitalized waterfront that maintained the historic facades while modernizing interiors and adding public spaces. This plan would cost approximately $48 million, Maria explained, substantially less than the proposed development, while preserving 28 existing businesses and adding space for 15 new ones. As Maria spoke, I watched the council members' expressions shift from skepticism to interest. Thomas, however, was conferring urgently with two men in expensive suits, representatives from the development company who hadn't expected this level of organized resistance. When they called a 15-minute recess, Thomas cornered me in the hallway, his voice low and dangerous. Do you have any idea what you've just done? Years of work, millions in potential fees? I know exactly what I've done, I replied, surprising myself with my calmness. I've given the council complete information to make their decision. This isn't about information, he hissed. It's about progress, about modernizing this backward town, about my reputation. No, Thomas, it's about doing what's right for the community. Community? He almost spat the word. These people needed this development. The tax revenue alone would have funded the new high school wing, the library expansion, all while displacing families who've been here for generations, I countered. There are better ways to progress than bulldozing our history. His eyes narrowed. You've been planning this for months, behind my back. Yes, I admitted. Because every time I tried to discuss my concerns, you dismissed them, just like you dismissed me today, in front of everyone. A flash of something, perhaps recognition, crossed his face before hardening again. This isn't over. When we get home, Miss Harrington, Dr. Ellison approached, nodding coolly to Thomas. The Environmental Committee would like to speak with you about your findings. Of course, I replied, turning away from my husband. As I walked back into the chambers with Dr. Ellison, I caught sight of Thomas still standing in the hallway, watching me with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of shock, anger, and something that might have been fear. The council reconvened, and Mayor Richardson called for preliminary comments on the alternative proposal. Several members expressed interest in exploring it further, with Councilwoman Martinez suggesting a task force to compare both plans in detail. Given the new information presented today, the mayor announced, I'm recommending we postpone the vote on the Riverside Heights proposal until we can fully evaluate these historical documents and the alternative development plan. The motion passed with a 6-1 vote. As the meeting adjourned, people surrounded me, Maria hugging me tightly, business owners shaking my hand, even reporters from the local paper requesting interviews. Through the crowd, I saw Thomas gathering his papers, his jaw tight as his developer clients gestured angrily. For 15 years, I'd been Thomas Harrington's wife. A background figure at social functions, a silent supporter of his career, a woman whose opinions were politely tolerated, then promptly forgotten. In one evening, I'd become Rebecca Harrington, a person with her own voice, her own power. Thomas pushed through the crowd toward me, his expression unreadable. Whatever came next, whether confrontation or conversation, I would face it standing tall. The voice I'd found in these chambers wouldn't be silenced again. The following weeks transformed my life in ways I couldn't have imagined. Thomas and I existed in cold silence at home, our colonial on Maple Street becoming a battleground of unspoken accusations. He slept in the guest room, leaving early and returning late, communicating through terse notes left on the kitchen counter. Working dinner with clients, don't wait up. Meanwhile, the Westfield Historical Society offered me a paid position coordinating the preservation initiative. Mayor Richardson appointed me to the newly formed Waterfront Development Task Force alongside Dr. Ellison and 2 council members. "You've got some nerve," Thomas said one evening, finding me at the dining table surrounded by architectural plans. It was the first time he'd directly addressed me in days. "The partners at the firm are questioning my influence with the council now." "I didn't do this to hurt you," I replied. "This was about doing what's right." "Right?" He loosened his tie with a sharp tug. "You know what would have been right? Discussing your concerns with your husband before publicly humiliating him?" "I tried, Thomas, for months. You never listened. Because I knew better." His fist came down on the table, rattling my coffee cup. 15 years building connections in this town, and you undermine me in one afternoon. "This isn't about you. Everything in this town is about connections," he snapped. "You think they appointed you to that task force because of your expertise? They're using you to get to me, to pressure the development team." His words stung because they contained a seed of doubt I'd been fighting. Was I merely a pawn in a larger political game? The answer came 2 days later when Councilwoman Martinez invited me to lunch at Westfield Country Club, a venue where I'd previously only attended as Thomas's +1. "I'll be frank, Rebecca," she said as we sat on the terrace overlooking manicured gardens. "Your research impressed me, but what really caught my attention was your courage. Do you know how many women in this town have been silenced by their husbands' ambitions?" She gestured subtly toward another table where the wives of prominent businessmen sat, their conversation carefully modulated, their opinions safely confined to acceptable topics. "I've been the only woman on the council for 8 years," she continued. "Next election, we need to change that." My fork paused halfway to my mouth. "Are you suggesting the East Ward seat is opening? The neighborhood needs someone who understands preservation and community values," she smiled. "Someone who isn't afraid to speak truth to power." That evening I found divorce papers on the bed. Thomas stood in the doorway, his expression cold. "You've made your choice," he said. "I won't be married to someone who undermines everything I've worked for." I stared at the papers, emotion rising in my throat. Not grief, but something closer to relief. "You're right about one thing," I replied. "I have made my choice." The media attention intensified as word spread about my potential candidacy. The Westfield Gazette ran a profile highlighting my work with the historical archives and community organizing. Barely mentioning my connection to Thomas, when he saw the article, he called for the first time since moving out. "Politics, Rebecca. Really?" His voice dripped with derision. "You'll be eaten alive." "Perhaps," I acknowledged, "but at least I'll be using my own voice." The task force's final meeting approached, with both development teams presenting their revised proposals. The night before, I worked late at the library, surrounded by community impact statements and environmental assessments. A text message lit up my phone. "You should reconsider your position. There's still time to avoid embarrassment." No name, but the number belonged to Charles Wilson, the lead investor Thomas represented. I showed the message to Dr. Ellison, who frowned deeply. "Intimidation tactics. They're getting desperate." He hesitated. "Rebecca, there's something you should know. I've been offered a research grant, significant funding, to withdraw my environmental concerns." My stomach tightened. "Will you take it?" "No," he said firmly, "but it shows how far they're willing to go." The task force meeting filled the council chambers beyond capacity. I presented our findings with a confidence that would have been unimaginable months ago. Our alternative plan had gained support from businesses, environmental groups, and 3 council members. Thomas sat in the back row this time, his expression inscrutable. When the developers presented their revised plan, it incorporated several elements from our proposal, a tacit admission that public opinion had shifted. During the final comment period, Thomas approached the microphone. My heart raced as he adjusted his tie, a gesture I knew signaled his preparation for a decisive argument. As representative for Riverside Investments, he began formally, I've been authorized to make an announcement. In light of community feedback, my clients have decided to withdraw their current proposal. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Thomas raised his hand for silence. Instead, we'd like to open discussions about a joint venture that would preserve the historical structures while allowing for sensitive modernization. His eyes found mine briefly. Sometimes progress means acknowledging when others have valid perspectives. The proposal passed unanimously, with Mayor Richardson publicly commending both sides for finding common ground. As people filed out, Thomas approached me, maintaining a professional distance. Congratulations, he said stiffly. You've become quite the community advocate. Thank you for compromising, I replied. A faint smile touched his lips. I didn't have much choice. Public opinion shifted after your presentation. He hesitated. Your research was thorough. The firm could use someone with those skills. I'm not coming back, Thomas. Not as your wife, not as your researcher. He nodded, accepting this with unexpected grace. I heard about the council seat. You'll probably win. Perhaps. Just... He paused. Remember what I taught you about town politics. It's not always as straightforward as right and wrong. That's exactly why they need different voices, I replied. 6 months later, I stood on the steps of City Hall, surrounded by supporters holding Rebecca Harrington for council signs. The morning sun glinted off the building's windows, symbolizing the transparency I'd promised in my campaign. Today marks a new chapter for Westfield, I told the gathered crowd and news cameras. One where preservation and progress work together, where every voice matters in shaping our community's future. The campaign had been challenging, but exhilarating. Thomas had kept his distance professionally, though I occasionally spotted him at public forums, watching from the back. His firm now represented the restructured development partnership, which had become a model for historical preservation with economic growth. Maria's Bakery had become my unofficial campaign headquarters, where strategy sessions unfolded over coffee and pastries. Mr. Chen contributed his decades of business wisdom, while the Watson family coordinated volunteer efforts. The polls show you 5 points ahead, my campaign manager informed me as we headed to the final debate. But Wilson is pulling out all stops with last-minute advertising. Charles Wilson, Thomas's former client and my opponent, had transformed from developer to politician, presenting himself as the business-friendly candidate while painting me as inexperienced. The debate moderator was Catherine Larson, editor of the Westfield Gazette. Tonight's final question: what qualifies you to represent the East Ward on the council? Wilson spoke first, highlighting his MBA from Wharton and executive experience. Westfield needs leadership that understands economic realities, not just idealistic preservation efforts. When my turn came, I approached the microphone, momentarily flashing back to that first council meeting when I'd found my voice. 6 months ago, I was known simply as Thomas Harrington's wife, I began. Many people, including my ex-husband, believed I would never have a meaningful voice in Westfield's governance. Murmurs rippled through the audience. I'd rarely mentioned Thomas during the campaign. What qualifies me isn't an impressive degree or corporate connections. It's that I listened when long-time residents feared losing their livelihoods. I researched when documents seemed incomplete. I spoke up when staying silent would have been easier. I looked directly at Wilson. Leadership isn't about imposing your vision. It's about amplifying the community's voice, especially those who've been overlooked. The applause that followed told me the message had resonated. Election night arrived with nervous energy. I gathered with supporters at the community center, watching results on a projected screen. The early numbers showed a tight race, with Wilson leading in wealthier precincts. "The University District results are coming in," someone called out, and the room erupted as my numbers surged ahead. My phone buzzed with a text message. "Congratulations, you earned it, T." The final tally confirmed my victory by 7 percentage points. As I prepared to address my supporters, I caught sight of Thomas standing quietly at the back of the room. Our eyes met briefly, acknowledgement rather than reconciliation. "Thank you for trusting me with your voice," I told the cheering crowd. "This victory belongs to everyone who believed that our community's character and future could be preserved together." Later, as the celebration continued, Thomas approached. "Councilwoman Harrington," he said, extending his hand formally. "Well done." "Thank you, Thomas. I underestimated you," he admitted. "We all did. People often underestimate those they've gotten used to silencing." He nodded, accepting the gentle rebuke. "The firm is representing the Historical Society on the Riverfront project. We'll be working together occasionally." "Professionally," I emphasized. "Of course." He hesitated. "For what it's worth, I'm proud of what you've accomplished, even if it wasn't the path I would have chosen for you." "That was always the problem," I replied. "It wasn't your path to choose." As he turned to leave, I added, "But I am grateful for one thing, Thomas." He paused, questioning. "That day in the council chambers, when you said I'd never have a voice there," I smiled. "It was exactly the push I needed to find it." The first council meeting of my term, I took my seat at the table where I'd once stood nervously at the podium. Mayor Richardson welcomed the new members before turning to our first agenda item, the groundbreaking ceremony for the Westfield Waterfront Renewal Project. As I reviewed the proposal, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey, from silenced wife to elected representative, from background figure to community leader. The woman who had trembled outside these mahogany doors was gone. In her place sat someone who had discovered that having a voice wasn't just about speaking up once, but about ensuring others could be heard too. And that was a legacy worth building, one word at a time.